Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we're breaking down a truly fascinating look at how our human operating system actually works. We're going to explore how our most primitive sensory inputs directly drive our neurology, our physical reflexes, and ultimately the biological engine of our willpower. It is literally a journey from the very tip of your nose all the way into the deep centers of your brain. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting the science of smell, adrenaline and motor responses, mastering pattern recognition, the neuroscience of willpower, and finally, neuroplasticity and mental health. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the science of smell and the evolutionary roots of our sensory world. You know, before we were these light sensors relying entirely on vision, we were fundamentally built to be chemical sensors, just detecting the safety of our environment. And it's fascinating how human intervention has literally shaped biology through selective breeding to alter that. Take dogs, for example. They all originate from wolves, right? But humans selectively bred them for very specific traits. On one side, we preserve the wolf lineage. Think of German shepherds with those long snouts, built for incredibly high scent capacity. But on the other side, we designed the mastiff lineage, dogs like bulldogs. We specifically bred them to be brachycephalic, meaning short-snouted, for bull baiting. Because of this, they actually have an astonishingly low number of pain receptors in the front of their face. We literally programmed their biology for pain tolerance over sensory reach. And that brings us to this massive, kind of funny misconception about our own biology. We tend to think human smell is just terribly weak compared to dogs. But get this. Researchers at Berkeley ran this wild experiment where humans were blindfolded, wore thick gloves to completely remove their sense of touch, and were told to track a scent. They were actually able to accurately track the scent of chocolate buried 7 inches underground, following it through a field literally just like a bloodhound. It turns out we have the exact same olfactory resolution as bloodhounds. The only difference, dogs just take more frequent sniffs and have these specialized nostril vortices that trap the air longer. Our hardware is incredibly potent. We just sort of let vision take the wheel. So why on earth do we actually believe the myth that our smell is so weak? Well, consider this mind-blowing stat. The chair of neurosurgery at a major medical school recently stated that 50% of all the information currently sitting in basic medical textbooks is outdated or totally false based on modern data. Science is constantly evolving, and old myths, like the weakness of human olfaction, they just take a really long time to get scrubbed from the books. Which actually brings us to something really actionable. Did you know your olfactory neurons are among the very few cells in the entire human nervous system that regenerate throughout your entire lifespan? It's true. If you start losing your sense of smell due to a virus or aging, there's a legit active protocol to bring it back. Step 1, taking 600 milligrams of alpha-lipoic acid daily has shown to be a helpful supplement. Step 2, active scent training. You physically sniff really potent recognizable odors, like a fresh lemon or deep roasted coffee. Doing this actually stimulates the electrical activity required to keep those neurons alive and regrowing. Moving right along to Section 2, adrenaline and motor responses, bridging the gap from scent to physical reaction. Let's see how this actually translates from raw sensory input into explosive physical action. The crazy thing is, your brain, for all its massive complexity, basically boils the whole world down to 3 super simple physical responses. Yum, I'm gonna move toward it. Yuck, I need to move away from it. And meh, I'm gonna pause and evaluate. That is your foundational motor system right there. Every complex neurology is ultimately rooted in keeping you safe by just deciding which of those 3 actions your body should take. And you can see this hardwired circuit perfectly in action with athletes using smelling salts. When you inhale that extreme, awful chemical, your brain literally doesn't even stop to think. The signal just blasts straight through the accessory olfactory bulb directly to the amygdala, your brain's threat center. The amygdala then immediately signals an area called the locus coeruleus, which literally sprinklers your brain with adrenaline. In parallel, your adrenal glands flood your body. In milliseconds, you are primed for explosive movement to get away from the threat. That is exactly why powerlifters use it. They're hacking a primitive yuck survival reflex to generate massive, sudden physical power. And as that adrenaline floods your system, it usually brings its chemical cousin along for the ride, dopamine. As the neurobiologist Dr. Robert Sapolsky points out, dopamine is not about the pleasure of reward, it's about the pleasure of pursuit. These neurochemicals basically work together as a gang to create alertness, focus, and this really intense drive to pursue a goal. It's the biological engine of motivation. All right, Section 3, mastering pattern recognition from basic reflexes to elite performance. So how do we take those basic reflexes and somehow refine them into elite human performance? The answer is essentially unconscious genius. And you see this brilliantly displayed in elite boxing by legends like Floyd Mayweather. When you watch a master at work, round one isn't about brawling at all. It's a massive download of data points. They're constantly analyzing tiny shifts in space. If an opponent lifts their left leg, the master's brain instantly registers that the opponent's weight is balancing on their right, perfectly predicting the exact trajectory of the coming attack. Through relentless, repetitive drilling, the brain completely automates this pattern recognition. The fighter slips a punch by a single centimeter and counters without a single conscious thought. Which brings us to Section 4, the neuroscience of willpower, discovering the brain's engine for tenacity. This is kind of the absolute climax of this explainer. How do we deliberately force ourselves to drill, to train, and to do the really difficult things required for mastery? Well, meet the literal biological seat of your willpower, the anterior midcingulate cortex, or AMCC. This is a highly specific structure deep inside your brain that scientists have recently identified as the absolute engine for tenacity. And here is the most mind-blowing part about the AMCC. It only activates and it physically grows in size when you voluntarily choose to do something challenging that you specifically do not want to do. Let's look at the actual dynamics of how this works. Brain imaging shows that the AMCC physically increases in volume in people who successfully stick to a diet. In people who fail their habit programs, it actually shrinks. It's notably massive in superagers. These are older individuals who completely resist normal cognitive decline. But here is the catch. If you love doing a hard 45-minute cold plunge or you just love heavy deadlifts, doing them is not going to grow your AMCC. The growth requires the friction of reluctance. You literally have to push through the "I don't want to do this" feeling to build the actual neural mass. And this perfectly illustrates what is essentially the ultimate life hack. By doing difficult things physically, by really leaning into that friction, you literally increase your brain's biological capacity to do hard things cognitively. Pushing through a workout you dread directly upgrades your ability to tackle a massive, complex project at work without procrastinating. It's all connected. Section 5. Neuroplasticity and mental health. Protecting and rewiring the system over time. Now that we understand how to actually build willpower, how do we protect and rewire this entire neural architecture over the course of our lives? Which really begs the million-dollar question for all of us. How do we actually safely rewire the adult brain when it gets stuck in negative patterns or trauma? Well, the reality is, childhood neuroplasticity is totally passive. Your brain just absorbs the world around it like a sponge. But adult neuroplasticity, that has to be intensely active. To rewire adult neural pathways, you need massive spikes in neuromodulators, things like adrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin. And this is precisely why clinical trials using MDMA for severe PTSD are showing such striking success rates. The compound safely spikes these modulators, temporarily reopening a youthful plastic state in the brain so traumatic memories can be reprocessed. But, and this is an absolutely essential prerequisite, this must happen in a highly secure, clinically supported environment with very strict safety protocols. But you definitely don't always need clinical compounds to maintain mental health. In fact, the basics are incredibly potent. Just compare sedentary aging, which directly leads to cognitive sluggishness and a total lack of mental energy, with sustained physical vigor. Studies consistently show that basic resistance training just 2 to 3 times a week strongly correlates with intense intellectual longevity. It keeps the brain sharp and actually demonstrates better mental health outcomes than many prescription SSRIs. I mean, there's a reason historical scientific geniuses lifted weights and ran well into their 80s. Yet as much as we try to optimize our own brains, we really have to remember that the data we feed those brains is constantly under threat. Objective reality is incredibly vulnerable right now. We're seeing ambitious data fraud in science, where researchers actually fabricate data to secure funding. We see deceptive media and political video editing designed purely to manipulate our emotions and completely bypass our logic. Our pattern recognition systems are constantly being hijacked by out-of-context clips and highly targeted media narratives. Which leaves us with this final thought. Your operating system, from the way you process a scent, to the adrenaline firing your muscles, to the AMCC driving your willpower, it's beautifully designed to adapt to the friction it faces. So, what difficult truth will you seek out? Or what hard task that you absolutely dread will you challenge yourself with today to grow your own brain? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with us. Take that challenge, and we'll see you on the next explainer.